Hey, my name is Mike. I'm a developer from Philadelphia, and today I'm going to be walking you guys through this awesome Python project called Basta Fazoolin. Let's take a look at some of the key concepts we're going to be covering in the video. We're talking about classes and methods. We're going to look at different techniques for list filtering and aggregation, and we're also going to talk about representing objects as strings. So I'm really excited to dive into this. Let's head over to the Codecademy text editor and get started. So we're here on the Codecademy screen, and over here on the left we have our instructions, and then we have our Python text editor in the middle, and then over here we have our output. So anything we output from the program will show up over here. Let's take a look at the project description. It says, Basta Fazoolin, you've started position as the lead programmer for the family-style Italian restaurant Basta Fazoolin with my heart. The restaurant's been doing fantastically and seen a lot of growth lately. You've been hired to keep things organized. And that's convenient because Python is great at organizing things and great at automating things. So we have 25 steps that we need to complete, and we'll start from the beginning at step 1. It says, Basta Fazoolin, at Basta Fazoolin with my heart, our motto is simple. When you're here with family, that's great. We have 4 different menus: brunch, early bird, dinner, and kids, and we're supposed to create a menu class. Now, a lot of times when we start Python projects just like this, one of the first things we're going to want to do is create a class, right? Because generally with these programs, we're dealing with some sort of an object that we want to represent, and classes are really good at doing that. So let's create our class called menu, and we'll be able to get started. So that's step number 1. We just created our menu class. Very simple. Step number 2 says that we should give menu a constructor with 6 parameters. So we have self, name, item, start time, and end time. So these are all the attributes that we want to keep track of about a specific menu. So down here, we'll create our constructor, and we can do that just by saying def init with these funky little underscores, and then we're going to pass in all of these. So we have all of our parameters, and now what we want to do is we also want to just assign them. So I'm just going to say like self.name is equal to name, self.items is equal to items. This is always the most annoying part of creating constructors, is having to do this. Self.startTime is equal to start time. And actually, a lot of times, if you use other text editors, like when you're out in the real world, they'll have things that'll help you do this, so you won't have to type it out. But that didn't take too long. So we've basically said that when we say self.name is equal to name, what we're saying is the object that's getting created from this constructor, that object's name attribute is going to be equal to the name that got passed in. That's how these constructors work. I think sometimes people get confused when it's like self dot whatever, but that's all it is. So that's just what the constructor is doing. So we can check off number 2. That's done. And now we'll head over to step number 3. It says, let's create our first menu, which is the brunch menu. And brunch is served from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. And they sell the following items. So here's all of our brunch items. And we're going to create an object for the brunch menu. First thing we'll do, though, is I want to create a brunch items variable. That way we can store all these brunch items, because there's a lot of stuff here. So we have like pancakes, waffles, home fries. Actually looks like a pretty good brunch menu. And then we'll create a brunch menu object. So this is just going to be equal to a menu. And we'll pass in the name, which is going to be brunch. We'll pass in the items, and we're just passing in all this stuff that's up here. So that's the brunch items. And then we'll pass in the start and the end times. So one decision we have to make early on here is, how do we want to represent these times? I think probably the best way to do it is going to be using like a 24-hour military time type of thing. So like 11 a.m. would just be 1100. And then 4 p.m. would be, what would that be, like 1600? So this way we're able to represent the times as integers, because later on we're going to need to be doing some comparisons and stuff like that. So we'll just represent them in that 24-hour way right there. All right, so we created our brunch menu. Why don't we just test this out real quick, just for peace of mind. So we'll print out brunchmenu.name, and boom, it works. So that looks good. All right, step 3 is complete. We can check that off, and we'll head over to step 4. Now we're creating an early bird menu for the early bird diners. That menu is from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. So we're essentially doing the same exact thing that we did before. I'm actually going to put a comment here just so we can kind of clean this up. And then Since we're creating another menu, let's just copy this code because a lot of it's just going to be the same. So this is the early bird menu, and we'll change up this stuff. Early bird items, and then we have our early bird items. So obviously each menu is going to have different items. And then down here, this is the early bird menu, and it's called early bird, and we're passing in the early bird items. And then this is from 3 p.m. So that's 1500 hours to 6 p.m., which is 1800 hours. All right, so that's our early bird menu, and that should work because the brunch menu worked, and we basically just copied the code. Let's check off step number 4, and then we'll head down to step number 5. Looks like we're going to be creating a dinner menu. So again, we're essentially doing the same exact thing. We'll just copy this code, and we'll change this up into dinner. This will be dinner, and then we'll copy these. I feel like a lot of programming sometimes is just copying and pasting. Like you write the code once, and then when you need to write similar code, you just kind of copy and paste. Nothing wrong with that. So this is going to be all this dinner stuff. We'll call this dinner. And then dinner is from 5 p.m., which is 1700 hours, to 11 p.m., which is 2300 hours. All right. That looks good. And then step number 5, we can check that off. And down to step number 6, we're creating the kids menu. So that's looks like that's the last menu. So once again, we will copy and paste, and we'll create the kids menu. I'm going to change all this stuff to, kids. This will also be kids, and so will this. All right, and then we want to copy in the kids menu into here. So kids menu, pretty good menu. Got chicken nuggets, apple juice. That's some solid choices. All right, so the kids menu is from 11 a.m., so 1100 hours, and then it ends at 9 p.m., which is 2100 hours. So we have all of our menus. We have the kids menu, dinner menu, early bird menu, and the brunch menu, and they're all nicely organized. So let's check off step number 6. That is officially done, and we'll move on to step number 7. Hopefully it's not making another menu. It says, give our menu class a string representation method that will tell you the name of the menu. Also indicate in the representation when the menu is available. So what they mean here when they say representation, I realize this is a little vague. What they mean is when I go like this and I try to print out the kids menu, if I save, we get this kind of disgusting output. So this doesn't help me at all, right? I know that it's a menu object, but that's all. So what we want to do is we want to make it so when we print out any one of these menus that it tells us the name of the menu and then also gives us like the hours that the menu is available from. And that's actually pretty easy to do. We just come up here into the menu class. We're going to make another one of these little methods. This one's going to be called REPR, which stands for representation. We'll pass in self. All we're going to do with this method is we're just going to return a string. And this is the string that's going to get printed out anytime we try to print out the kids menu. So we can replace this disgusting thing up here with something that's actually descriptive and will help our users. So I'm just going to return a string. So I think what we'll do is we'll just say self.name, and I'm just going to concatenate a string together here. So we'll say the name of the menu is available from, and then we want to print out the start time and the end time. So because these are numbers, we're going to have to put them in this string function. So start time and then to end time. All right, so we're saying the name of the menu is available from start time to end time. So if we save this, now you'll see over here, instead of getting that disgusting object output, it says the kids menu available from 1100 to 2100. So it gives us the hours that the kids menu is available. So there we go. That's how we do these string representations. Those are pretty useful just for kind of being able to print something out and not having some ugly output. So step number 7 is done. We'll head over to step number 8. Step number 8 says try to print out the string representation. If you call print brunch, it's to print the following. So we kind of did that with the kids menu. We can check that one off, and we'll head over to step number 9. 9 says give menu a calculate bill method that has two parameters, self and purchased items, a list of the name of purchased items. So this is going to be a function or a method inside of our class, which is going to take a list of purchased items. So these are going to be like menu items. And you'll notice that the menu items have actual prices associated to them. And the calculate bill method will return the total price of the purchase. So if they bought like pancakes and waffles and home fries, then this method would tell us how much they owed the restaurant. This should be pretty fun. So we'll make another method down here, and we're going to call this calculate bill. And this will take self, and it'll also take purchase items. So purchase items is going to be a list. This is going to be just like a list of the names of the items. So let's think about how we're going to do this. What's our algorithm going to look like? Well, a lot of times when I write methods like this, I usually like to start off with, I'll just define a variable. So we have our bill, and this just kind of gets us started here. This is eventually going to be what we're going to return, right? The bill is how much they owe us. So we start off with this, and then down here we'll return bill. So the question is, what goes in here, right? What do we put inside of here? Well, let's think about this. If they pass me a list of all of these items, if they pass me pancakes and waffles and burger, I basically just want to add all of these up. So I just want to add all of these up together, and I'll return the result of that. So that's pretty easy. We can do that. So I'm just going to say for, and we're basically going to loop through all of the purchased items, right? I want to loop through all the items that the person purchased, and I want to add them up together. So I'll say for purchased item in purchased items. Now this is something that I like to do a lot. You'll notice that this list up here is called purchased items, plural. So a lot of times when I create these for loops, I will call the actual item that's getting iterated purchased item. So I'll call it the singular version. That's, I think, sometimes a good way to do it just because it's more descriptive. So we're going to loop through all the purchased items. And before I start adding them to the bill, I want to make sure that they're actually available on the menu. So like, let's say instead of passing in pancakes to this method, someone passes in something that's not on the menu, like a cheesesteak or something. And in other words, if they do that, I don't want to add it to the total, because if it's not on the menu, then it's not going to work. So in here, we'll create an if statement, and I'll just say if purchased item in self.items. So if the item that we're trying to add is actually available on the menu, then down here we'll say bill plus equals, and now we're going to want to get the price of the purchased item. So let's say that the purchase item is pancake, right? So let's say they pass in pancakes into this method. So pancakes is here in this purchased items array. Well, we need to get the price of the pancakes, and the price of the pancakes is available in the items array that we're storing on the actual object. So over here, I can just say self.items, and this is just like a dictionary, so we can just reference it by key. So like in this case, pancakes is the key, so we can just pass in purchased item, and that's going to give us the price. And we'll add that to the bill, and then finally, when we're done, we'll return the bill. So this looks like a pretty good function here. I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. And over here, looks like step number 9 is done because we wrote that function. Now we'll move on to step number 10. It says test out menu.calculate bill. We have a breakfast order for 1 order of pancakes, 1 order of home fries, and 1 coffee. Pass that into brunch.calculate bill and print out the price. So let's do that. Down here below the brunch menu, we'll say brunch menu.calculate bill, and they had, what did they get? Pancakes. So let's save this, and actually we need to print this out. Let me get rid of this. So we'll print out brunch menu.calculate bill, and we should get the total. So $13.50. Let's see if that's right. So if we take pancakes, which is $7.50, plus the home fries, which is $4.50, plus the coffee, which is $1.50, that does add up to $13.50. So that looks good. Now let's also test out that other functionality. So remember, we have this if statement. So if I put something in here that's not on the menu, like home fries with a ton of S's, and I save this, you'll notice that it doesn't get added to the bill, and that's because of this if statement. So that's just a little clever thing that we put in there. So step 10 is done. We can check that off. Our function is working just fine. And then down here on step 11, it says, what about an early bird purchased? Our last guest ordered a plate and the vegan mushroom ravioli. Calculate the bill with .calculate bill. So this was on the early bird menu. So down here, we can say early bird menu, calculate bill. And we honestly don't really need to do this because I know for a fact it's going to work. But we will pass these in anyway. So we'll make our array, we'll pass in the plate, and we'll pass in the vegan mushroom ravioli. And let's see, and we'll say, well, we got to print this out. So let's see what we get. We get 21.5. I wonder if it tells us what the answer is. Yeah, 21.5. So that looks good. And looks like we did a good job on this function because it matched the actual answer. All right, so that's step number 11. Check that off. And we'll move on to 12. And it says creating the franchises. And I'm just going to delete this so we can keep it clean. All right, Basta Fazoolin with My Heart has seen tremendous success, and why wouldn't it, with the family market, which is fantastic because when you're at Basta Fazoolin with My Heart with family, that's great. We've decided to create more than one restaurant to offer our fantastic menus, services, and ambiance around the country. So first it says, let's create a franchise class. Interesting. So we are now kind of creating these different classes and things. Actually, I'm going to put this up here. I'll put it above the menu class because I feel like a franchise is kind of like higher up than a menu. So the franchise class is up there. We can check this off. And then it wants us to give the franchise class a constructor. So to take in address and assign it to self.address. Also take in a list of menus and assign it to self.menus. Same exact thing as we did over in the menu class. We'll initialize this with a constructor, and we're taking in an address, and we're taking in a list of menus. So then over here, we'll say self.address is equal to address, and self.menus is equal to menus. So again, real quick, because I feel like sometimes people get intimidated by these constructors. When we're saying self.address is equal to address, self right here, this actually represents, or this stands in for the object that's getting created. So when we create an object, this init method or this init constructor gets called. And when this init constructor gets called, it actually returns a franchise object. And so when we say self, this is referring to the object that's getting returned from the constructor. So I'm essentially assigning the address of the object that's getting returned from the constructor equal to the address that got passed in there. Hopefully that makes sense. I think sometimes constructors can be unnecessarily confusing. And we finished step 13, so we can check that off. And we'll move on to step 14. It says, let's create our first two franchises. Our flagship store is located at 1232 West End Road, and our new installment is located at 12 East Mulberry Street. Pass in all four menus along with these addresses to define flagship store and new installment. Real quick, before we do this, I want to clean this up a little bit because we have kind of a lot of code floating around here. So I'm going to kind of just organize this. And sometimes if you have a lot of code like this, it helps to organize it because it just kind of clears the space for you to work, and it allows you to see things a little bit better. So we're creating our two franchises, and we're going to pass in all of the menus. So first things first, why don't we create a menu array? And this is going to have, actually we'll call this menus. This is going to have all the menus in it. So what are all the menus that we have? We have our brunch menu. Pop that in there. We also have our early bird menu. Throw that in here. We have our dinner menu. And then we have kids menu. So this is just an array where we can keep all those menus so it's easier to pass them in. Now let's create our two stores. So we have our flagship store, and that's just going to be a new franchise, and we can give it this address. So that's where it's located, and then we'll pass in the menus. And then we'll also do this for our new installment store. And this is located at, what is this, 12 East Mulberry Street. And we'll also pass in the menu. So now we have our 2 new franchises, our shiny new franchises that are going to go out there and make us just tons of money, piles of money for Basta Fazoolin. So let's check this off. 14's done. We'll move on to number 15. Task number 15 is give our franchises a string representation so we'll be able to tell them apart. If we print out franchise, it should tell us the address of the restaurant. So we kind of already did this with class menu, and we're going to do it again. So dare I say it, we're going to copy this code, and we're just going to straight up paste it into here. And actually, we can just return self.address, not location, because that's what it should say. It should print out the address of the restaurant. So that's all we have to do. We just return the address, and let's test this out. So we'll print out flagship store, and we get the address. Awesome. So that's working. Cool. So our representation method worked, and we can go ahead and check off step number 15. We are moving through this, guys. We only have 10 more steps. All right, it says, let's tell our customers what they can order. Give franchise an available menus method that takes in a time parameter and returns a list of the menu objects that are available at that time. Interesting. So remember before I was saying we wanted to represent the menu times as numbers because we're going to have to do some comparisons. That's where this is going to come in. So this is probably going to be the toughest method yet that we have to write. So it's called available menus, and this should take in self, and then I think that's all we're going to, also we're going to need to take in time because we want to figure out at the given time what menus are available. So like imagine you're calling up a restaurant and you're like, hey, it's 7 p.m. What menus do you have available? Well, they could run this function and it would go ahead and spit out the answer right there for them. So just like we did with the other method we wrote, calculate bill, I always like to start with just defining some variables. So we'll create an available menu variable, and I'm just going to set this equal to an empty array. So I'm assuming that we're going to return an array. We're going to return an array of all of the menus that are available. And then we'll just return that. So boom, we're already like halfway done with this function. All we have to do is just fill in the middle here, which is unfortunately the hard part. So let's think about this. We essentially, what we want to do is we want to go through all of the menus that we have at the franchise, and we basically want to check to see if they're available at this particular time. So let's do that. Why don't we loop through all the menus? So I can say for menu in self.menus. We'll loop through all the menus, and basically we just want to do an if statement. So I just want to check to see if the menu's start time is before this time and that the menu's end time is after this time. Remember, the menu has a start time and an end time. We have this information. And this menu right here, if I say menu, this is an actual menu object. So we have access to like menu start time. So let's do this. Why don't we say if the time that the user passes in is less than or equal to start time, and the time that the user passes in is greater than, or actually no, this should, greater than or equal to start time. So if the time that the user passes in is greater than or equal to the start time, in other words, if it comes after the start time, and the time that the user passes in is less than or equal to the menu's end time, that means that that menu is available, right? Because the time falls within the start and end time of the menu. And then over here, all we're going to have to do is we can just say, if I can spell this right, available menus, and we'll append the menu onto the end. And then we can just return the available menus. So this looks pretty good to me. And why don't we go ahead and test this out? So I'm guessing that's what step number 17 is going to do. So check off 16. 17 tells us to test out our available menus method. Call it at 12 noon as an argument and print out the results. So Over here, we'll just do this with the flagship store. It doesn't matter. They both have the same menus. Available menus. We'll do 12 noon, which is 1200. So if we save, and looks like we're getting an error here. I must have messed something up. Okay, so here's the problem. This is a stupid problem. It says, instead of saying available menus here, or available menus, I put available menu. So I left out an S, and I'm suspecting that I did that over here too. Okay, so that was hopefully the problem. We'll save, and now we should get an output when we print. So I'm going to print out flagship store.available menus, and now it tells us these are all the available menus. So it says brunch menu available from 11 to 4, and then the kids menu is available from 11 to 9. So those are both of our available menus. Let's try it at, let's say like 10 a.m. Let's see what's open then. So at 10 a.m., we don't have any menus available. How about like 8 p.m.? So at 8 p.m., we have both of these same menus available. So that's kind of cool. This tells us all of the different menus that are available to us. So we can check off step number 17. Our function worked despite one minor spelling problem. And now on to step 18. It says, let's do another test. If we call available menus with 5 p.m. as the argument, so we'll just do that real quick. 1700. We kind of already did this too. So at 5 p.m., we have even more menus available. That's interesting. So we can check off number 18. That's done. And then I think we're on to the last section here, which is creating businesses. So it says, since we've been so successful building out a branded chain of restaurants, we've decided to diversify. We're going to create a restaurant that sells arepas or arepas. I never know how to pronounce this. It says, first, let's define a business class. So up here, we'll create another class, and I'm going to put this above franchise. Business, this needs to be a class. And down here, I'm assuming we're going to have to create a constructor. So check off 19, and we need to have a name and a list of franchises. So we'll say init. It's going to take a name and franchises, and then we'll do our whole self.name is equal to name, and we'll do self.franchises is equal to franchises. So we have our constructor. Now, I want to point one thing out that's, I think kind of one of the points of this exercise is that these classes kind of work with each other. So the franchise class has a list of menus that it's storing and that it's keeping track of. And the business class then has a list of franchises. And so these are kind of like hierarchical classes, right? The franchise class has a bunch of menus. The business class has a bunch of franchises. And these classes are kind of just like further and further building out our little business model here. So I just wanted to point that out because I think it's one of the main points that this is trying to make here. So now that we created our constructor, we want to create our first business, which is named Basta, Fazoolin with my heart. Obviously, that's our amazingly successful business. So down here, we'll create our first business. I'm just going to call this Basta, and I'll set this equal to business. And inside the business, we're going to pass in the name, which is the lovely Basta Fazoolin with my heart. And looks like we got some, I'm going to make these double quotes so we don't get that problem. And then we're also going to pass in a list of franchises. So put our list of franchises over here. So we have the flagship store, and then we also have the new installment. So we've created our Basta business, so we can check 21 off. And now we're going to create a newer business. It says before we create our new business, we'll need a franchise, and before our franchise, we'll need a menu. So we created Basta Fazoolin, and now we're going to create our arepa restaurant. So down here, the first thing we'll do is create like the menus and stuff. So I'm actually going to create a comment just to separate this. So this will be the arepa stuff. And the first thing we'll do is create this menu. So arepas. I don't know how to pronounce this, guys. I'm sorry. Items, and then over here, we will have all this stuff. So we have our arepas items, and then we're going to create our menu. So arepas menu, and we've done this a million times already, so we should be pros by now. We'll say menu, and this is going to take a name. So the name is taken arepa. And then we're also going to pass in the items. So the Arepas items. And then finally, we'll pass in the time. So this is from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Okay. We have our menu. We have our items object up here. Now we can check this off. So we made our menu. And now we're going to create our franchise. So just like we did up here with these franchises, we'll create ours. I'm going to copy one of these franchises. And we can call this Arepa's Place. And this is going to be located on Fitzgerald Avenue. And we're also going to pass in just the one menu. So we don't have like a bunch of menus. We just have the Arepa's menu. All right, that's done. Check that off. And now finally, we're going to create our business. So again, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and copy this because there's no use in rewriting code that's already been written. And why don't we just call this Arepa? This is going to be our business. It's called Take an Arepa. And then we'll pass in our franchise. We only have one franchise, which is the Arepa's Place. So we have our menu, we have our franchise, and we have our business. And I think the last step is, why don't we just test this out? So we wrote a lot of code there without actually testing any of it. So why don't we print arepa.menus 1 or 0. So we'll print out the first menu. And whoops, this should be franchises, not menus. Okay, so here's our franchise. And then here we can say this should have menus 0. So we get one of our menus. Cool. So it looks like everything we just did worked. So we now have the Python code structure where we can represent a business that has franchises and franchises that have menus. This is kind of a big feat, guys. And this is one of the cool things about object-oriented programming is it allows us to create programs where we can interact with objects that we encounter in the real world. So something like a menu, right? I can go to a restaurant, I can physically pick up a menu and I can look through it and I can see when it's available and all that stuff. But when we have just a straight Python program, we don't have like a physical menu that we can grab. And so in order to represent that, we create these classes and then we can create these awesome class hierarchies like we did here. And we can represent all these cool pieces of information in very, very few lines of code. I mean, just in 81 lines of code, we were able to essentially create a business with franchises and menus. And this code would work in a production application if we wanted it to. So step 25, we deserve a big congrats. Let's check that off. We created a system of classes that help structure your code and perform all business requirements you need. Whenever we need a new feature, we'll have the well-organized code required to make developing and shipping it easy. So I just want to say congratulations if you've made it to the end of this video. You've definitely gotten a lot of experience with creating objects, that's for sure. And from all of us here at Code Academy, I want to just say thank you so much for watching. Like I said, my name is Mike, and happy coding.